Whether it be the terrifying madness and savage reputation of the Viking berserkers and the Maori warriors, the lifelong dedication and training of the Spartan Hoplites and the Aztec Jaguar warriors, or the advanced tactical brilliance and fearsome weaponry of the Mongol horde and the samurai, history's elite super soldiers had their own set of weapons, tactics, and training that earned them their frightening reputations. But which of them was the toughest? Here are 14 of the toughest elite super soldiers in history. 1. Spartan Hoplite. When a male Spartan was born, he was inspected by a council of elders and left at the base of Mount Taygetos to die if deemed unfit to fend for himself in life. At age 7, Spartan boys entered an agog, where they began rigorous military and warfare training, learning combat techniques and battlefield tactics. The Spartan army was created to serve as a living wall, and they fought in a tight, interlocking formation with their shields serving as a defensive barrier and their long thrusting spears doing the bulk of the damage when facing off against opposing. Since they were essentially bred from birth to be fighters, their might was nearly incomparable. 2. Viking berserker. While much of the berserker training and preparation is steeped in legend and myth, it's believed that they would put themselves into a semi-hypnotic state before battle. In this condition, they would have little reaction to pain and even less self-control when it came to the violence they inflicted on others. Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson wrote in his Ynglinga saga around 1225, they rushed forwards without armor, were as mad as dogs or wolves, bit their shields, and were strong as bears or wild oxen, and killed people at a blow, but neither fire nor iron told upon them. Berserkers were walking towers of madness clad in wolf skins or nothing at all in battle. They were so bloodthirsty that they could often present a danger to the Viking soldiers that fought alongside and behind them. Believed to have almost superhuman pain endurance and strength, they were some of the most formidable yet least strategic warriors in history. 3. Mongol Warrior. Training for Mongol warriors began at an early age. They would enter the formal army in their early adulthood, and the formidable horde would run formation drills and practice diversionary tactics to have a wide variety of defensive and offensive measures that could be implemented against different enemies across various terrains. The two greatest strengths of the Mongol warriors were their endurance and their speed. The Mongol army could cover 100 miles in a day, and each soldier took with him 4 or 5 maras so that he could rotate between horses as each began to get tired. In fact, it was their equestrian skills, especially their unmatched talent for horseback archery and superb marksmanship, that made each man in the Mongol horde a formidable foe and allowed their empire to expand to unequaled size. 4. Samurai. Training started in childhood and took place at a designated school that emphasized physical fitness and agility, as well as Chinese studies and. In adulthood, samurais trained daily, even though they were only used in battle when called upon, and were expected to live their lives by the strict code of ethics known as Bushido. Samurai entered combat accompanied by armies of foot soldiers and archers, and they faced off against opposing forces in head-to-head combat, sometimes on horseback and often on foot. The feared samurai vanguard would be the first to charge into combat, typically with spear in hand, while katanas were drawn when the battle presented one-on-one combat situations. One of the greatest honors for a samurai was to earn the first spear, which means being the first warrior to actually engage the enemy in physical combat. 5. Roman Centurion. Joining the Roman army was a 25-year commitment. Those hoping to join had to be physically fit, healthy, and strong. To keep the army a well-oiled machine, soldiers would march 20 miles per day in full armor and would have to set up and take down camp each night and morning. Whenever they weren't at war, they trained for battle in combat formations and in one-on-one sparring, and helped build roads, shelter, and aqueducts in the ever-expanding territories. Centurions were the big men in charge, leading 80-man groups known as centuries into battle. Their commands were followed to the letter as they led their men into combat, typically in tight defensive formations until nearing enemy front lines, when they would burst into combat with javelins and swords. Centurions were appointed through merit, meaning they were grizzled veterans who'd earned their command through combat and bloodshed, making them some of the most skilled and effective warriors among the widely warrior. Apaches were renowned for their athletic endurance, and it was believed by many at the time that young Apache men could run nearly 100 miles a day and climb both trees and entire mountains with ease. From childhood, Apache boys were taught how to fight, hunt silently, and use their surroundings to their advantage while defending their tribes. Apache warriors were considered to be some of the greatest guerrilla fighters in history. They would lay traps and ambush their enemies. While fighting invading white settlers and the U.S. Army, the Apache's distinct advantage came from their lifelong training and their superior knowledge of the terrain. They fought with such ferocity that the very word Apache took on a mythical, near-superhuman quality. 7. Celtic Warrior. The Celts were a warrior culture and were raised to appreciate the importance of combat. Young Celts looked to older warriors and veterans in their culture for inspiration and guidance. Many Celts trained to become mercenaries with the goal of being hired as private soldiers for warlords, including Hannibal. As an army, the Celts were terrifying, yet somewhat ineffective during longer skirmishes. They attacked with a violent mad dash at the opposing army, sometimes unclothed as a means of psychological warfare, which the Romans referred to as the furor Celtica. They were often physically imposing in both height and musculature, but they were often brought down by long-distance weapons that devastated their attacking forces. However, as powerful mercenaries, the Celtic warriors were revered and turned the tide of many battles fighting as hired warriors for different generals and warlords. 8. Teutonic Knight. Recruited at a young age, those in the Teutonic Order dedicated their lives to training. They all took vows of communal poverty as part of their monastic rules, meaning they had almost no personal belongings, or collected wealth. Additionally, they were not allowed to enjoy the frivolity of any form of entertainment, so their only pastimes were praying, preparing for war, and wood carving. Teutonic Knights fought battles like most European armies, allowing long-range archers and artillery to devastate opposing forces before charging in on horseback and on foot to take down their enemies in one-on-one combat. They were well-armored, well-trained, and vicious. Throughout their existence, they were accused of brutal practices and full-on slaughter, although it's possible those were rumors circulated by detractors. 9. Maori Warrior. Like many cultures in which warfare and combat played a central role in their society, Maori began learning how to fight, wrestle, and use weapons as children, and formal communal training began in their teen years where they sparred with padded weapons. Maori warriors would prepare themselves for battle mentally and spiritually with a war dance known as a haka, which included loud chanting, waving their weapons, rhythmically stomping their feet, pounding their chests, and making frightening faces. Maori warriors were physically intimidating that covered their faces and bodies. They were also famously brutal and unrelenting in their attacks. The warriors often entered battle in small fighting units known as hapu, and often preferred surprise attacks in which they ambushed enemy parties, attacking with shocking viciousness and leaving opponents paralyzed by fear. Adding to their fearsome reputation, Maori warriors collected the severed heads of their vanquished enemies, and it is believed by some historians that Maori warrior chieftains may have cannibalized those they defeated in battle to consume their mana. 10. Zulu Imp. Zulu Imp training began as early as age 6, when young boys served as porters and aides to their older brothers and fathers in combat. Shaka revolutionized Zulu military training, not only with the introduction of the iklewa and a superior shield, but also with his emphasis on mobility and formation drills for his soldiers. As Impi fought without sandals or footwear to improve their mobility and speed, their training included hardening the soles of their feet by stomping on thorn bushes and tree branches. Under Shaka, the Zulu warriors fought to utterly annihilate their enemies, and they employed a scorched earth policy of destroying anything that could be used by their opponents while advancing through their terrain. The highly trained Zulu Impi, who have been compared to the Spartans, often bested militaries with greater technological might and more advanced weaponry through their surprisingly brilliant tactics. Bolstered by an ingrained and intense pride for their culture and their fellow soldiers, the Zulu Impi were fearless fighting machines. 11. Aztec Jaguar Warrior. As the Aztecs were a warrior culture, the importance placed on warfare and combat was ingrained in their people from birth. Warriors were usually drawn from elite and noble classes, but each potential warrior had to prove themselves on the battlefield. You couldn't be promoted to the rank of Jaguar or Eagle Warrior, a different but similar position, until you'd captured at least 4 enemies, alive, and brought them back for ritual sacrifice. Jaguar warriors were among the most feared at the time, as they were battle-hardened and not afraid of danger. They were often positioned in small groups among units filled with more inexperienced warriors to keep them from breaking formation or panicking in the face of the opposing army. They were also placed at the forefront of battle, as their reputation for utter fearlessness gave the Aztec forces a psychological advantage. 12. Persian Immortal. At the age of 5, those chosen to fight in the Persian elite unit were taken from their families and began training in military compounds, learning a variety of combat skills. At age 15, they would finally be allowed to join the ranks of the Immortals. They would serve until they died or turned 50, whichever came first. They were known as the Immortals because they maintained a standing army of 10,000 warriors. If a soldier ever passed, got sick, retired, or abandoned their post, they would be immediately replaced. They were fierce warriors who were also adaptive to the needs. 13. Landsknecht. They were trained by, and began as an imitation of, the Swiss Reichsläufer, a clan of mercenaries that became their bitter rivals. Landsknecht came from all walks of life, all classes and creeds, and were unified by their appreciation for payment. However, they practiced and trained in tight formations to perfect their battle tactics. The power of the Landsknecht came from their battlefield strategy, which involved fighting in large, closely formed phalanxes of pikemen that could stand their ground against cavalry charges, and allowed the lower-class mercenaries that made up the ranks of the Landsknecht to bring down well-trained, elite knights. 14. Egyptian Mamluk. Mamluk, which is the Arabic word for owned, were literally slave warriors. They were bought to serve their leaders, so training and warfare were their only known way of life. They trained to fight every day under other, older Mamluks warriors, and their lives were dedicated to learning the art of warfare. Mamluk warriors were renowned across the land for their archery skills and their use of a lance and sword while attacking on horseback. Shortly after establishing their empire in 1250, the Mamluks famously defeated the seemingly invincible